Okay, so Phil is traveling back, so he might make it back, but he asked that I get started. So I'm Susan Nakamura, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning Roles. So we will start with the public hearing items. First one is proposed amended rule 1469, which I'll be providing the summary. 1469 has come to the board to set hearing a number of times. We're finally going to be bringing this to hearing for September. The impetus of the rule is to address these tanks that are currently unregulated, that are have high emissions of hexavalent chromium, and then also address issues that we found through ambient monitoring in Newport Beach, Long Beach, and Paramount, where we found issues in regards to the building enclosures. So the proposed amended rule has these core requirements. We have worked with the stakeholders to address the issues that have been raised from on the environmental and community side. The concern has been on the chemical fume suppressants. The chemical fume suppressants include chemicals that are similar to the chemical that EPA had banned, which is called PFAS, and PFAS is part of a family called PFAS, and the new formulations include some of the family chemicals of PFAS, which are bioaccumulative. So there's a commitment in the rule to conduct emissions testing and look at the health data, and then by January 2020 we'll make the decision whether or not we want to ban the chemical fume suppressants. If we do ban them, then facilities would have three options. One is a new provision that we added into the rule that we would look for another low-cost alternative that we would approve or certify similar to a fume suppressant. We would conduct the emissions testing. The second option would be the facility would install add-on pollution controls, and then we would seek funding. We have a commitment in the resolution to seek funding to provide assistance to these smaller facilities. And the third option would be for them to phase out of the use of hexavalent chrome. From the business side, the concern has been the cost associated for the small business facilities, particularly for those that if the chemical fume suppressant is not certified, and the impact for those smaller facilities to not only the capital for pollution controls, but the operating and maintenance. And so we have that alternative provision where we're going to seek some, hopefully we'll be able to identify technology to provide assistance to them that will be something similar to like a fume suppressant that won't have the heavy capital costs and the operating and maintenance costs associated with it. The other overarching comment from the Metal Finishing Association is the overall cost of proposed amendment rule 1469. Staff has worked throughout the rulemaking process to make it a very cost-conscious rule. About 80% of the costs are associated with the installation of pollution controls. This is the most important aspect of the rule because these are unregulated tanks. Their hexavalent chromium emissions are about 300% higher than the standard that we're establishing in the rule. Any questions or comments?
What are the different type of businesses that are, I mean, there's because I haven't been to any of these places ever. There are the smaller places where maybe like hex chrome isn't necessary because they're doing decorative versus the military spec where you need serious hardcore stuff. So can you just sort of explain the range of these little places and what they're doing?
Okay, so there's three basic categories of the plating and anodizing facilities. So when we talk about chromium plating, there's yeah, I'm not Phil. There's the decorative plating facilities, and there's hard chrome plating facilities and the chromic acid anodizers. So decorative plating is they're plating for faucets, fixtures, golf clubs, chrome wheels. So it's decorative. The amount of chrome that they're trying to to plate onto the particular substrate or part is much thinner, so the amount of time that it resides within the tank is much less than if you were to look at a hard chrome. So hard chrome is a lot of times it's equipment, vehicle, construction equipment, shafts, and it will be to increase the corrosivity and also hardness on that. So they're trying to get a certain thickness in terms of the amount of plating that's the amount of chromium that's being deposited onto the part. And then the chromic acid anodizers generally would be for aerospace, for aircraft parts, landing gears, and it's a lot of that is for DoD type of work, and it's for corrosivity, primarily for corrosivity.
Really, really.
Right.
So what for going to the decorative, and where, you know, our EJ folks will argue there's options. Are there options for that lower level where it's not, you know, you need something seriously hardcore like on a military aircraft versus something that just looks nice? Are there options at that lower end for those folks? When folks talk about, let's get rid of hex chrome altogether.
So there is the option which is trivalent chromium, but we only have 4 facilities in our area basin that are currently using the trivalent, and we found that it's difficult to use, and that a lot of times they will have to still do hexavalent chrome plating for certain parts because they want the corrosion resistance and other characteristics that you would get from chrome plating. So for bumpers, for example, that's one area.
So the trichrome doesn't perform as well as the hex.
Right. So it's difficult because it comes down to the aesthetics of a part. And so, you would be telling Harley Davidson, or you're telling, Titleist, and he's like, you cannot chrome plate your club. It's like you can't get the white bright. And that's a very desired characteristic. I did attend a conference in Denver. It's with basically where the military is talking about how they're trying to move out of hexavalent chrome. They've been working at this for over a decade. They're like getting to some aspects now where they're just beginning to change the mill spec or the mill standard, but they're working more on the concern for corrosivity. And so when I was talking to some of the folks, it's like on the decorative side, it's like they're like, oh, that even seems more difficult because they're not trying to get a certain look. They're trying to ensure that the function. So it's a little bit different. But I think there's information exchange that can occur. There is resolution language that commits us to conducting a technology assessment to look at alternatives, and then there's also a pilot study that we're committed to doing. So I think there's a lot of information sharing on the military side that we can learn from in terms of other types of operations that they're talking about, not just substituting the type of chemical, but they're also talking about different types of techniques. One technique that they talked about, which I'm not advocating, but instead of like a plating bath, it's called brush plating. So you don't have the emissions that are coming from the tank, and it's much more contained. So just some other ideas.
Is the alternatives issue and the use of the fume suppressants, is that the only remaining issue with the environmental and EJ communities?
That's the only issue that I'm aware of. I did at the Stationary Source Committee meeting, Florence Caribbean, who is part of the Del Amo Action Committee, had raised a number of concerns in the rule. So one of the concerns that she raised, I think that is probably one of the larger issues, was that she felt that there were provisions in the rule that allowed the executive officer to make a decision to just allow someone to use a lesser provision. So we explained to her, we went back to that provision, and there's actually criteria if somebody was to use an alternative method, that it has to meet the same emission reductions, has to have the same or less risk. associated with it. And so what we added for clarification is, which I think was a good correction, was to add the specific provisions in which it applied to the alternative method, because she read it as that it applied to the whole entire rule. And then there were some other little fixes that we did to provide clarity based on our meeting with her. So, and then I did speak with some of the other environmental representatives, environmental community representatives, and so nothing new was brought up.
Okay, because I understand that they're going to be opposing it at the hearing.
Okay.
So I just want to know whether that was still the only remaining issue.
Are they still talking about monitoring?
No, not, I mean, the monitoring aspect was discussed in the rulemaking, but we decided to do a separate rule, Rule 1480.
Right, but are the environmentalists still complaining about that?
Not in the most recent conversations I had, yeah.
One question I had is, initially there was a lot of concern about a facility that was across the street, for example, would be able to leave its door open if it wasn't facing the sensitive receptor. And you made the argument that it would be okay as long as you were avoiding that cross draft. And it was when the cross draft occurred was really where the concern was going to be. As presently the rule, the proposed rule has language which allows that door that's closest to the sensitive receptor to be left open for up to 2 hours in a day. If you're trying to avoid the cross draft because that creates the impact, doesn't that 2 hours a day create an impact, particularly if you're not requiring them, if they open that door, to close a different door?
So there is a provision in Proposed Amendment 1469 that requires them to close the side, if they have a choice between a door on the east side or the door on the west side, if it's within a certain distance of a sensor receptor or a school, they have to close that door. So the door closest to the sensitive receptor in school that's facing, they would have to close that side of the building. So when you have that option, they need to make sure that door is closed. So there's two provisions within that. One is for schools and one is for the residential sensitive receptors.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying that for either schools or the sensitive receptors, that the door that's closest to them cannot be open for 2 hours a day?
We say that it has to be. That's a good question in regards to the ingress egress. There is a provision that allows them, if you have a door, that you can use it for ingress egress, and that the 2 hours. We can. They can open that door, but that's the side of the building that they're supposed to close.
Okay, but then you get the cross draft if they open the door, unless they close the door on the other side.
That's true. Yeah.
So what's the environmental impact of doing that?
The environmental impact. You have the cross-draft issue for those facilities, but just during that time. But you need to allow people to, move equipment or,
Right.
Yeah. You can't just, I think it'd be difficult to say you can never open that door.
Right, but you could say that you can avoid the cross draft by closing another door.
The provision of the rule is that they're supposed to try to. It's not that you're allowed to open it for 2 hours. It's that you can't open it for more than 2 hours. So the provision is that at all times, except for ingress and egress, you need to have one of those doors closed.
Right. Okay.
But just recognizing at some point, it's like, although that main door is closed, it's like they may open it, and it's like if they happen to be doing a lot of movement of equipment at that point, we're saying don't do it for more than 2 hours.
Okay, well I mean, to me, based upon what you said in terms of where the impact is with cross-draft, that seems to be a big hole in the rule, not to, I don't know, it seems to significantly reduce the impact, particularly when I think at both the workshop and at stationary source, staff indicated that it would be very difficult even to enforce that 2-hour time period.
Okay. All right. So the question is in regards to the provision for a cross draft. It was actually at Stationary Source Committee that it was brought up that should we have some provision that would allow them a maximum time that they can open door where two sides might be open to allow for equipment and people to ingress egress just for that sort of exception. So we added this 2-hour provision in there. There's sort of, they're pushing from the industry side. It's like, they would want it longer, but that 2-hour was supposed to be more stringent in terms of anybody that was, possibly moving something and, it was more than 2 hours that they could get a ticket for that. So.
It just seems, just fundamentally it seems to undermine the purpose of avoiding cross-draft, but then you've made it unenforceable. Well, it's not that you've made it unenforceable, it's just by its nature difficult to enforce. So,
but if somebody were, okay. All right. I have like an oh shoot thing going in my head right now.
and you always do, that's why I'm just kind of.
While Susan's thinking, can I mention something about the cost impact? Because Susan had mentioned that the industry was concerned about the costs, and one of the things you'll hear them say is the socioeconomic report says the cost could be 3 to 7% of annual revenue. But if you look at the report, that's one small subcategory of the affected facilities. It's actually, I believe, among the decorative
small
decorative platers. So I think that's a very conservative approach. And if you look at the rest of the industry, the numbers are not up there. So that's why we're really trying to focus on finding a substitute, like Susan mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Isn't that the first time the district has ever done an analysis like that particular one?
Kind of. I mean, I think we tried to do a small business analysis in 1421 for the dry cleaning rule, but we had a lot of difficulty because to obtain the revenue because much of the industry was a cash industry. We did use the Dun & Bradstreet information and most of the ratings, they rate the confidence of the data between 1 and 10, and most of the confidence was above 7. However, in doing that cost of revenue, going back and drilling down on some of the details of it, we do see some areas where we would really question the revenue or the number of employees. Right. Based on our site visits or inspectors' site visits to these facilities, understanding that they're reporting 1 employee with, X revenue, and we've been out to the facility and we see, well more than 1 person, and Dun & Bradstreet still giving it a confidence of 10. So I think we have to be careful in regard to that cost of revenue type of analysis and the information. We didn't want to change any of the data that from Dun and Bradstreet, even though we knew that that information, based on our own observations, was not quite accurate. So, and we can't question someone's reported revenue.
Right.
But when we can confirm whether or not the number of employees is accurate. But the other part on the cost analysis, we will err on the side of conservative. Conservative mean that we will err on the side of overestimating than trying to underestimate the cost. One area on the cost impacts is 80% of the cost is borne from the installation of pollution controls. And as our assumptions are that there's 3 tiers of tanks that we've identified. Tier 3 tank are the ones that will definitely need the add-on pollution controls. Tier 2 tank is an interim provision that we're saying, okay, you're just above what could be a tier 3 tank level. But if you're able to put a cover and you're able to do certain mechanical fume suppressants, there's certain things that you can do to get you down below that level, then you would be called a tier 2. You wouldn't need the add-on pollution controls. We're assuming even those tier 2 tanks are going to go into a tier 3 cost. So that's where the cost will be very conservative on the numerator part, and then just to be careful on that denominator on the revenue.
So the cost of the equipment, the expectation is that that's going to be relatively reliable, then at least in terms of hitting the maximum, right? Because the other part of that equation is something brand new. The level of confidence in that number is not high.
I wouldn't say that it's not high, but I would say that for some it wouldn't be high.
Okay.
It's the best information we have to go on, though.
Right.
Again, we're not getting independent reporting of revenue from all these facilities. It's all through the Dun and Bradstreet service.
So, and that's to give some sort of indication as to affordability as opposed to cost effectiveness.
Right. Yes.
I have a small question, because most of us pay him to dig into the books. No, that's not true. We don't have that ability. But I do have an issue, a question on the risk. And I see on the staff report, it says 0.046 is used there, but I'm going to think that that's based 0.046 nanograms result in 25 cancer risk. But I imagine that's a multi-pathway approach. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we call a methodology to estimate risk, and so for most of the metal particulates, there are multi-pathway assumptions that are used.
Right. But OEA, I believe, says there's no significant risk at 1 nanogram.
No,
I have it right here. That's why they say for inhalation, 0.001 microgram, which is 1 nanogram per day.
my guess is you're probably looking at a chronic non-cancer, not on the cancer.
Don't know. It says
That's,
under safe harbor levels, whatever that means.
yeah,
I don't think that's a cancer risk.
no.
Okay.
There's just no safe level they would never use the word safe when they're talking about a cancer risk.
Although in our PowerPoint, they say these facilities are less than one nanogram, and they're just in the community, and where they're looking at the industrial area where the facilities are, they're looking at the high risk, high chromium levels. And we already say that there's 1.1 nanogram is the typical risk within.
The backgrounds in that order.
So what would we be happy?
0.06.
We would be happy to see no community over 0.1 nanogram.
We haven't said 10,
Depends.
well,
It depends on the proximity to people. I mean, you can't just say blanket.
So
Well,
It makes
I know.
his point.
But, there's, I think in 1401, 1402, there are some
Yeah, so the 20
reporting requirements based on risk.
10 in a million and 25 in a million from a single facility. So
Right. So we're
25 in a
looking
million
at-
corresponds to 0.046 nanograms per cubic meter. So if that was modeled from a individual facility, we're not talking about.
Okay, so one of the things I tried to find out was what is the risk from inhalation? And I never could find that, because that 0.046 is multi.
Most of it's inhalation. I believe if you took out, this is what my staff told me, I don't know if they're on or Huh? It's the other way? Yeah, okay. Well, maybe you could speak to it, answer the question.
Yeah, it's the multi-pathway factor, and when we were looking at risks from inhalation versus multi, if you look on Rule 1401, we have a list of the different factors, and for the metals, it can be anywhere from 6 times higher with the multi-pathway factor.
Interestingly, most of the regulations I see in the nation is on water, drinking water, not air. Which suggests to me that the major issue regarding cancer is ingesting. So that's why I raised the question. That's all. There is no real answer at this point, so I rest.
Any other questions?
You wanna take it, Phil? This is 2580.
Huh?
2580. Or you want me to keep going?
Go for it.
So before we go to the next one, I wanted to introduce a couple of people to you. It's been so long since we've had a board assistant briefing that we've hired a new assistant deputy executive officer for compliance, Terrence Mann. Terry, do you want to say a few words about your background?
Derek is telling me to stand up, but I can't tell if he's pulling my leg.
He's pulling
I'll
the
do it. How you doing? So I'm Terrence Mann. I come to you from the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I was a federal criminal prosecutor for 10 plus years.
Good.
Now I am Marion's number 2, and if I can be of any service whatsoever, please feel free to call me.
And we also have another announcement. Most of you probably know Naveen Berry, but he has recently been promoted to Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Technology Advancement, overlapping with Fred Manassian here, trying to get up to speed on all of Fred's assignments. So,
Wow, congratulations.
In the military, when you get a promotion, you're supposed to, I won't say on the film, but supposed to take us all out. So after this, at 5 o'clock, we'll meet somewhere.
We have the same role.
yeah.
Okay.
I have the pizza place on speed dial.
So, apology for interrupting.
No. Okay. So I guess we'll continue if there's nothing else on 31. So item 32, as long as we're on page 9, the AB 2588 report. Susan, or you want to kick it to Jillian?
I'm good. Okay, so 2588 annual report provides a summary of the activities in AB 2588, identifies the number of facilities that we've prioritized that have gone through HRA, health risk assessment, that are doing the voluntary risk reduction plan. We have a number of facilities that are like just on the cusp of us approving, so I think the report for the 2018 activity will be different than 2017. We're also updating our guidelines. We wanted to add more specificity. The voluntary risk reduction program is new. And this is the first set of facilities that are going through the program, and as we're going through the program, there's lessons learned. So we wanted to add more specificity so we can guide the facilities when they submit this information, so they know what a complete submittal will look like and our expectations when we receive the information. So, any questions?
I just want to add, we had this a month or two ago, and we thought they were just clarifications. We did get some feedback that they wanted a workshop on these guidelines, so we held that workshop, worked out all the issues. I don't think there's any remaining issues on that.
And that was with C.
So you had made the, yeah.
C made the request, and there were several stakeholders there. So, any questions on that?
tie into Paramount and Compton at all?
Well, we're well.
Yeah, Aircraft and Anaplex are facilities that were identified as potentially high-risk facilities. We're getting really close to finalizing the health risk assessment there. When they're a potentially high-risk facility, then everything comes in all at once, and we review what's called the air toxics inventory report, the health risk assessment, and the risk reduction plan, and we do that all together. And so we're getting very close to doing that, and then they would be moving into the public notification meetings following that.
Is this going to get more complicated because of AB 617?
It could in terms of more workload on 2588 if we go out and monitor and identify additional. Well, I think just by the fact that we're going to be doing more monitoring, history has showed us the more monitoring we do, we find new things and may have to bring more facilities into the program. But how the actual 2588 process, the health risk assessments, I mean, that'll probably go in parallel with 617 and be part of it, but we still have state law to comply with under 2588, in addition to new state law under 617. And there's only...
But they are going to kind of dovetail it.
Yeah, there's only one explicit statutory potential crossover, which is 617 talks about auditing high-risk facilities. It seems to just point to this program, but we do that kind of anyway, so it's still kind of to be determined how that gets implemented. But there may be more facilities coming in, and then as we approve health risk assessments, if there are notification requirements and risk reduction requirements, those will probably be folded into risk reduction plans within, or emission reduction plans within 617. And in terms of communication to the community and outreach and stuff like that. But it remains to be seen how much of that is tied together. Any other questions on item 32? All right, moving back to beginning of the agenda, which is page 2.
I'm going to do that on that later. Yeah.
All right, so on page 2, there's the minutes. There's no comments on that. So we're setting public hearing for October rule hearings. One of them is amendments to 2001, 2002, and they're pretty straightforward, but I'll let Susan just summarize those briefly.
So there's two major amendments to 2001 and 2002. The first amendment is in 2001 to allow a facility that wants to opt out of reclaim provided they meet specific criteria. We're allowing those facilities to opt out, but if they do elect to opt out, and if they had any type of new or modified source where they would trigger a new source review, they couldn't, even if they're under 4 tons per year, we're letting those facilities know that they couldn't access our internal bank. They would have to go to the open market to purchase ERCs for that type of activity.
At least for now.
Just for now.
We may do some analysis later that would open that up. But.
And then the other provision, which is in 2002, allows a facility that if we were to exit the facility, and because there's still concerns about new source review and what would happen to facilities as they exit, reclaim, and what would be the new source review provisions and how they would be able to obtain offsets. We're still working on that with EPA. We're still trying to figure out how that's going to work for the exiting of the facility. So if a facility were to exit, which we've committed to that we would not exit them, but we're adding this provision so to let facilities know that they have the option to stay in to reclaim for a limited amount of time until we resolve the new source review requirements. This is just to provide that additional assurance to them that, don't worry. It's like if you get that exit letter, you can still stay in reclaim until we resolve the issues with new source review.
But they would still be subject to all the FARP rules that we're working on. That doesn't get them out of the compliance schedules they would otherwise. So they have a choice. They can exit. They can exit but not have access to the Reclaim NSR program or they can stay in and have access to the NSR reclaim program, but they'd also have to keep reconciling their RTCs as long as they're in. So it's a choice facilities can make in the short term.
And if you may, when we get to the hearing on this, get comments, why are we saying that the facilities cannot use our internal bank even if they're under 4 tons, which facilities outside reclaim can? The reason for that is when we did the rulemaking that set up the internal bank, we did a CEQA analysis about what emissions would be allowed by that internal bank, and we put a cap in the rule to make sure that we didn't issue more permits than would be allowed under that cap of emissions. So we didn't, at the time we did the analysis, look at reclaim facilities at all. So we're worried that the reclaim facilities coming out of reclaim may put too much burden on that bank, which is supposed to be largely for essential public services. And so as an interim measure, as we were saying, they can come out, but they would have to buy offsets if they need them for a new source review event. If they don't want to do that, they can stay in reclaim and use RTCs for their NOx offsets.
The main issue here with the NSR really impacts only those that are going to have modifications that increase emissions. Is that,
Or they're gonna put in new equipment.
or new equipment? So, so for those folks that aren't looking to put in new equipment that increases emissions, because you've got to have emissions increase before that gets triggered anyway. So for those that are not going to increase emissions by moving out of reclaim, after associated with moving out of reclaim, the effort that staff is putting in to try and work with EPA to be able to allow, I'll call it something different to happen. It doesn't affect these people, right? It doesn't affect all these other people. So it seems to me staff is making a lot of effort for something that may get a lot of public opposition. And EPA may not buy off on it anyway. So I'm just wondering why this is, why all these fits and starts need to happen when we could smoothly move out of reclaim and not play with the NSR issue.
You mean, are you suggesting that we retain the NSR, reclaim NSR? And
No.
So eventually, so there's lots of concerns with NSR, and the greatest one is that there just are no NOx offsets on the open market. So essentially you'd have a permit freeze on new facilities or modifications if there's a NOx increase until somehow that open market can generate additional NOx off ERCs, which is going to be very difficult because most of the projects and most of the capital is going to be going into lowering emissions per rule. So there's not going to be a lot of excess ERC generation out there unless you have a major shutdown. So the problem we're trying to face is, our job, we don't want to hinder economic growth if it's done in a green and clean way and meets all our regulations. So we need to find some supply or some way to be able to permit these facilities going forward. And there's just no way to do it now. So one way, again, we have a working program within Reclaim right now, and that can be continued for a short period of time. We don't think that should be, staff's view is we don't think that should be permanent. But that can get us through this short-term period while we try to work out what comes out the other side as we transition the Reclaim NSR program to some other type, some other type of NSR program, whether it's completely traditional or some kind of programmatic accounting or some kind of other internal bank. We're looking at all those options. But you talk about this smooth transition out, it still doesn't solve this kind of fundamental problem of the supply. And there's probably 4 or 5 corollary problems on NSR that we're also trying to work out at the same time.
But those people who really are not going to use NSR might feel comfortable going out even though they know they can't use 1304 because they're not ever going to need it. So there is a pathway for people who really aren't ever going to use NSR. It's just people who thought they could get out and make use of the internal bank. That's where we're drawing the line, saying no, they can't. But if they really don't have NSR issues, they can.
In these amendments, that's true. But looking
Right.
at other future amendments, we still have that issue of the larger facilities not being willing to get kicked out with the uncertainty that on the NOx ERC supply.
If you say that because those ERCs are not there and they're not on the street and that creates a big problem, to me, that's an indication that the entire NSR program and how it's designed is just not working. Because the program was designed to allow people to generate credits if they need them by over-controlling elsewhere. And I understand there are barriers with doing that, but I'm not sure that I'm not sure that putting a Band-Aid on it, like trying to generate credits in some other way, whether it's on paper or not, really solves your problem either.
So, we're in the process of talking to EPA and looking at all kinds of different solutions to this problem. Some more programmatic, but I don't think a lot of people would agree with you that some of the NSR implementation is challenging, and especially the PM market is really tight right now. And yeah, in an area where the rules are as stringent as ours, it's very hard to generate an ERC. Although, it does happen. But it doesn't, some kind of holistic change, at least in terms of NOx, to how we handle NSR is what we're looking at. There are ways to do it programmatically. In fact, we have a programmatic NSR equivalent under 1315, the internal bank, and there's other, and we have another NSR equivalent program under Reclaim right now. So it's not impossible to design an NSR equivalent program that's non-traditional. So we're looking at those options now.
Do you have some ideas?
Yeah. Actually, a number of years ago, I submitted I did an analysis for a client that had a new technology that was designed to fix some of the problems with NSR. And at the time, I did get some consensus from both the environmental and industry side. And district management at the time wasn't interested in that kind of approach. But one thing that might be helpful now is if there is this concern about particulate matter in particular, is if the district in coming up with these rules, the landing rules were to include PM marked. That might make a little bit of sense and to at least mitigate some of the impacts. Not to mention the fact that Reclaim is needed to meet SIP requirements there.
Yes, Mark, if I can jump in. The acute issue that we are trying to address right now is not necessarily the plan of the issue, even though I'll acknowledge that that's a bottleneck. That is mostly the NOx issue. And there are no, as I think indicated, there are no NOx ERCs, plentiful ERCs available out there for people to use. One of the primary reasons why there aren't too many was the vast majority of the NOx emissions are under the reclaimed universe, which was our cap and trade, our market-based universe. There was no financial incentive, economic incentive for people to generate ERCs that are typically used in the non-reclaimed universe. So that's the dilemma that we have to deal with. There are new facilities coming into the basin. There are existing facilities trying to get out of reclaim, and while you may argue most of the NOx reclaim requirements will require them to reduce their emissions, and therefore there won't be any offset needs, but routinely those facilities replace their existing equipment that are being treated as brand new offset meeting equipment under the NSI requirements, and there are no ERC offsets out there in the open market. So we gotta figure out a mechanism to allow our business to continue to function while we are keeping the environment whole.
I mean,
I completely understand that and know that, and I'm just concerned that the pathway that staff is moving along is going to delay things, and ultimately, if you get the kind of answer you want from EPA, will lead to litigation, which I think we all want to avoid.
Those are strong words.
I'm not sure which pathway that staff is undertaking you're talking about, because we're still pretty wide open to many of them. And, you know, and EPA is not an easy hurdle at this point. So, you know, it's right now with RTC credits at the pricing where they are, with what the work that we're doing, it is quite easy for a facility to get to satisfy NSR with an expansion project. It is incredibly cheap and easy. So whatever we do is probably going to be a little more restrictive than that.
But I think,
current.
I want to respond, Mark, to some things that you had said, and that is, you know, we're most likely to face litigation from the environs. And I think that's why it's so important that we've got Dave Pettit and Mike Carroll working with us on this to try to help stave off some of those issues. And I think, you know, we do have certain challenges with EPA, but, you know, I'm a little bit more confident, perhaps, that we'll be able to resolve those issues with EPA. And I think that what we need to do is make sure that we have a consistent perspective, both from what it is that we're approaching as well as how EPA does this. And we encountered what I would say is a speed bump. And, you know, I'll make sure that we address this with appropriate people, whether it's in the region at EPA or whether it's at headquarters. And so I haven't been convinced that the scenario that you played out is what we're facing with. I think there's a lot of concern, and I think we're trying to do our best to address that.
There are some interpretations by EPA that would essentially force us to not end reclaim because of this NSR issue. We don't agree with those, but that's the corner, one of the corners we could be backed into, and that's not something we want to do, obviously. So we have to figure out a solution here.
So also you mentioned that we could get through this easier if we established BARC rules for PM, but of course we have BARC rules for PM, so is there specific rules that you have in mind that we should be doing?
Well, for all the landing rules, staff has chosen not to set up a PM BART.
We have other rules for PM limits on
Yeah,
most of it's the same equipment. It just may not be in the same rule.
Yeah. So I was just wondering if there was something in particular that you thought we should be doing.
Well, if we did the same sort of analysis that we did in setting BART limits for both ammonia and NOx for those landing rules.
We retrofit cows maybe?
GAC filter.
Are you talking about interpollutant trading opportunities in that?
Pardon me?
You're talking about interpollutant trading
No,
opportunities?
I'm not going down that road right now.
We should talk after and see.
Yeah, we should. I think this horse has been
Okay.
severely beaten.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, just to be clear, you said there's some interpretation by EPA that you need to keep reclaiming?
Well, the net effect would be to make it impossible, pretty much impossible to transition out of the Reclaim NSR program, which would mean essentially keeping Reclaim to some extent or a large extent.
And we're hopeful that we can work around that because EPA's never was crazy about reclaim in the first place. And if they realize that this interpretation is, as Phil says, going to make it virtually impossible to end it, maybe they'll rethink that interpretation.
And let me just add, that view was expressed by one individual and doesn't reflect management or certainly senior management within the region. And that's where I was going when I said, I'm confident that we can get to the right people to make sure that there's a consistent approach. And the person that we got that feedback from is not the person that will be the authoritative, definitive voice. So we're dealing with it.
Okay.
They'll find that.
Yeah, but we're just providing an option this is not dealing with all those long-term issues. This is hopefully to allow us to move forward with the BARC rules and give the regulated community comfort that they have some options until we work out the long-term issue. Okay, page 3. Item 3.
So item 3 is, the next 3 items are actually technology benefit items, so I'll put those in order. The first one is, so we've become a trusted partner with the EPA and ARB for implementing SEPs, supplemental environmental projects to do with air filters. So this is another one where we're receiving 2 SEPs from the EPA to install air filters in specific geographic regions. We are also coupling this with, there was a DWP, special variance revenue fund. So when they thought they were going to have to run diesels during the natural gas shortage, we worked out a SEP with them. And so we're going to implement a portion of that SEP to do 3 electric buses and also air filters around 2 of the stations that were intended to run diesel. So I can have answer any questions on that one.
Where was this?
There's the 2 EPA SEPs. One was general throughout the basin. That was the Schneider. Then Old Dominion was specific to Rialto, and then looking at different cities within the empire. So Rialto is the first one that we're going to prioritize.
Matt, so you said we're going to use the DWP funds?
Yes.
And then once we get the funds reimbursed from EPA?
So it turns out, we already have the funds from the EPA.
Okay, great.
So the issue that you have raised before is
Okay, thanks.
Okay, the next one, item 4, we're recognizing the revenue from ARB for the voluntary NOx remediation measures. This was as a result of, they were litigated in terms of biodiesel increase in NOx, and so they agreed to provide funding to the districts to offset those NOx increases. So we're recognizing about $2.7 million from ARB to do NOx mitigation, and we're just going to fold that into our normal Moyer program. So we'll be bringing the Moyer awards to the board in October. So you'll see that some of this funding will be applied to that. And then the other big pot of money is for the Place Your Ride program, EFMP. So ARB has opened it up to all districts, but we're getting the lion's share still, us in San Joaquin. So we are going to just recognize those funds and then implement the project. As part of those funds, we are also adding additional funding to Opus Technology, so they do all the smog check and also do some case management. So we're supplementing their contract to help us implement the program. I can answer any questions about that. And then the final one on my plate is number 5. So that's amend projects for emission reductions. So there was a trailer bill to the budget last year where we received a significant amount of money to implement emissions reductions as part of AB 617. It was actually AB 134 was the budget bill. So back in November, our board approved us awarding part of that money to implement in disadvantaged communities. So we were the first district to take action to help implement emission reductions under AB 617. But subsequent to that, ARB went to their board and broadened the categories, so they made it more flexible. And so we had to go back and revise those awards, and it actually turns out we're adding about $4 million more to all of those awards. So this is just adjusting those contracts and those awards to provide additional funds. If you have to answer any questions.
Any questions for Matt? Okay, the next item is item 6. As you remember, it was in May, the board voted on our facility-based measures, and with that direction, there were a lot of adoption resolutions to do additional analyses. So this item is to issue an RFP to help us do some of those analyses on the warehouse and distribution center facility-based measure, looking at some of the different business models in the sector and looking at some of the impacts that a rule or a measure could have on freight operation in the basin. So we're just issuing an RFP to get some outside support for those analyses. Any questions? All right, Derek, number 7.
Sure, number 7 is, this is to execute a contract for, a 3-year contract for our Martin Luther King and St. Child's Day. We issued RFP, we received 3 proposals, and for this, the committee, admin committee recommended awarding it to Leanne for 3 years. Any questions? Okay.
All right, next one, Chris.
Next item, our legislative representation is about to expire in June of 2019. This item is to issue an RFP to seek our proposals to continue our representation in DC. Any questions?
All right, item 9.
Actually,
Oh, sorry.
just a little, given the, professional staff at EPA and current administration, kind of what's the dynamic in DC as we try to move stuff forward, because we're California and
We're not well liked.
Well,
Depends on the day of the week.
I think what's going to be interesting is going to be the upcoming election in November, for sure. And if, houses flip, it'll be a different dynamic right now. I mean, it's not that we have we're California, yes we are, but fortunately we have some EPA, especially EPA staff that, we do talk to. So they're not against us, they're open to listening. So I think we still have, some opportunities there to be successful.
Let me add to that. So the dynamic is very much anti-California. But when you look at the technical issues that we've been raising, we've done it in a way that it's not California. We've done it where we've brought in other states. We've brought in red states. We've brought in blue states. More importantly, what we've done is we've brought in business. We've brought in the National Chamber to weigh in on like the heavy-duty truck rule. We brought in all these other associations. So the way that we frame it, and frankly, the way that even Bill Wareham, AA for OAR, Office of Air and Radiation, have said is, these are all points that we agree with you, but we recognize that California is perhaps not the best person in front of us. And we said, we understand that, and that's why we're getting other organizations to be out front on this, but we're very active behind the scenes. And so to be active behind the scenes, we do have 3 firms right now in DC that frankly have excellent access across the board within the administration and within Congress. So we have had no problem meeting with CEQ, with OMB, with White House, Vice President's office, with Bill Wareham, with Andrew Wheeler. We have that access. We have good dynamic. The issue is, how do we maintain that? Who's the best group to do that? And frankly, where the Carmen Group has been effective is really building on that business coalition and making sure that the business coalition is out front. So in one sense, we're the puppeteer and we're asking all these other groups to go out and and do all those things, but it's those firms that make it possible.
Any other questions for Derek? If not, item 9, Ron?
Good morning, this is a standard item that we do every year for our class system, children database licensing, maintenance and support. The funds for this expense are already in our budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
There's no questions there. John, item 10.
Good morning. This item relates to 2 job classifications. The first one is for the career development intern, which is our program for young adults who have transitioned from the foster care system, and we provide them with job training and experience. To enhance the program, we're recommending that we're to extend the time limit on the internship. Per the administrative committee's recommendation, we're going to go from 1 year to 3 years that you can be an intern. In addition, we're going to expand the eligibility to be an intern in this program. The second part of the agenda item is to add back the source testing manager position. It was a position that was previously part of the district's workforce. It was deleted in 2009, and based on program and operational needs, we're bringing it back. It's already in the budget, and so both of these items don't have any fiscal impact. Happy to answer.
I have just a comment. On the regular student intern program, do we have a mechanism where we can identify very bright young people who might have a career here and maybe create avenues to slip those people in after they graduate from college? Have we considered anything like that?
So we have had interns who have come to work here afterwards.
Right, I understand that, but do we have we thought about creating some sort of vehicle to just slip them in without a competitive thing if we recognize that they are incredibly bright? And
that is something that we could look at. It would have to still fit within the structure of it depends on what the position is, what the requirements are. It would be an entry-level position for the most part, so there would be some parameters that we would have to look at that. Those would require board-approved amendments to those job classifications, so it is something we can consider. But the internship program has been very beneficial. We've had people come with interest in working here. They've come back when they have graduated, and so for the most part, we've had some good impacts.
Okay. Nothing else on 10. Item 11 is an MSRC item.
Just a typical MSRC work, the technical work plan where they come to the board every month with approved items, and so there's an alphabet list of different things that are under their work program code with the Department of the Cities, as well as a large natural gas infrastructure co-funding project request. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Okay, if there's no questions, the remainder of page 6, items 12 through 15. Any questions on those reports? All right, on to page 7, 16 through 19. Additional reports, any questions there?
Anything on the roll forecast?
Oh, it's empty, there's nothing on it.
No, I'm gonna go on vacation.
We made
Not just any major changes.
1135,
1 month.
Yeah, was moved 1 month, and 1118.1, which is non-refinery flares, for 2 rules that were moved 1 month.
Nothing too major.
So they're going to be in November?
1135 was October, is going to November, and 1118.1.
It's now December, I think.
Yeah, December.
I think methylene chloride is on the, there's no date associated with it yet. It's still on for this year. I understand there recently were a couple of new deaths from methylene chloride exposure. Where are we in terms of role development on that?
I think It's kind of been on our radar for quite some time. We still would like to move forward, but there actually has been quite a bit of activity at the federal level, and there was some consideration of them moving forward with a rule.
Yeah, that doesn't look like that's
It hasn't.
going.
Yeah, so it would be hard for us to move forward as that was also going on.
Yeah.
So if it really does look like they aren't going to be moving forward, I don't know if it was on their rule for their regulatory forecast.
It was not on the unified regulatory agenda. What happened was that there were rules that actually had been proposed at the end of the last administration for NMP and methylene fluoride. Those were withdrawn by the current administration. And then, with some subsequent publicity about the deaths from methylene fluoride, some of the families met with Scott Pruitt, and he agreed to start rulemaking again. But that was right before he left.
Right.
And there's been no development since then.
Right.
So I would suspect if we really don't see anything, then next year we would probably, resources allowing, we obviously have a lot of rules on the calendar, but I have staff that's been eager to get going on that. So again, it'll likely be on the calendar for next year, and what the timing is, we don't know.
And it looks like our favorite rule relating to TBAC seems not to be on the calendar anymore, or is that? I thought we had put it on last December for this year.
Was it to be determined, or was it?
It was to be determined, but I don't think I saw it in to be determined anymore.
Right.
So where are we going on that?
To be determined.
To be determined. I mean, we're incredibly challenged with our rule workload. We have to prioritize. There's just no way, even if we had the staff to do it, it's almost not feasible to bring 3 rules to the board every month, especially in terms of the testimony we're getting. So we need to prioritize, and the time that the board has, and the public has a time to input on that is in December, when we bring a proposed rule forecast to the board, and we will, again, we will be, doing that through the public process. It may even be more public process this year because of 617 requirements on scheduling the BART rules. So there'll be an opportunity at that point. But again, if we put every rule on the calendar for next year that we would like to do, it would be probably more than 3 a month in terms of hearings, and that's just not feasible. So, for many reasons.
Well, I got asked about it, and I knew you missed hearing about it, so
Thank you.
I brought it up.
What's your Mojave? You can take 3 rules without testimony in 10 minutes. Another story.
Tell me how they do that, and we'll look into it.
It was amazing.
You don't want to do it right.
Okay. Nothing else there. Anything on item 21 or 22 on page 7?
There will be obviously discussions on 22.
Yes, I assume somebody's sales tax. Do you expect that to be pulled?
No, we can speak to it, Derek.
Sure. So July staff took item to Ledge Committee to seek guidance on how we want to move forward with a proposed legislation for authorization to put a sales tax initiative on the ballot. It was only discussed a little bit in committee, and it was voted on. Actually couldn't get out because there wasn't enough members of the committee, so it's going to the full board. Full board, I'm sure, will have discussion. It's obviously the AQMP is very important to us meeting our attainments, and we need some help in making that attainment. So the sales tax is one of the options, and we're seeking guidance from the board on whether that's one of the roads that we want to take to help us get into it.
questions on that? Okay. Page 8 through item 28, any questions on the committee reports or other reports there? All right, item 29, Lockie, it's the NSR report. Your team.
Our local NSR program is not just even better than equivalent, but equal to federal program.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so
Be brief at the meeting.
So the last item is item 30. I want to go into detail, Sarah's here, but this is essentially, like I said before, in May when the board adopted the direction on the facility-based measures, there were not only a lot of analyses to do, there were a lot of report backs in there. The first one is due on one of the measures, the new development measure, but rather than just report back on that, staff thought, because of all the other report backs coming up, that we would do just one report back on all the facility-based measures and go through them one by one and give the board just a status update on where we stand on all those. It won't be incredibly lengthy, it'll just kind of be a status report like they had asked for. But if you have any questions on the details in particular measure, we're going to answer those questions.
Anything on rail? Is there...
Yeah, I mean, we're working on a rail ISR rule. We've met with the railroads once or twice, and we have started working on concepts for that ISR. We're planning to do some site visits, but we are moving forward with the rule.
Some of the questions, but that's okay.
Anything else in any of the measures?
I do encourage anybody wants to talk about ISRs to look at the San Joaquin annual reports. Those are valuable because we've got some, it was entertaining. We got some feedback from the EJ community that, the San Joaquin rule is just pay to pollute. And it's like, no, here's how much money they raised, here's what they spent it on, and here are the emission reductions. And even though we're not going down the San Joaquin path necessarily, there are quantifiable reductions there. And I did share with you in the last big warehouse project we had, which was a 4-hour board of supervisors meeting with testimony from both sides, the unions and our local EJ folks. If you look at our conditions of approval, I probably should have brought them up, but it's, electrification, alternative fuel, staff on site, that kind of stuff. So there is a lot of stuff local jurisdictions can do.
Right. Many of which don't want us to do anything.
Or they want you to have land use authority.
Right.
At one time, if I'm remembering correctly, in the SIP, there were specific measures that were assigned to local government. Has staff considered going back and placing, ask local government to do their fair share?
You could speak to the specific measures. I could speak to what we're doing now in facility-based measures. But.
So back in the early 90s, we did have an AQP that had local government measures to carry out. One of the things that happened was we got some legislation with the things we wanted the local governments to do being declared illegal. And so it was just a difficult thing to pursue. And later on, we learned that EPA would, unless the local government was willing to put its measure in the SIP, the AQMD would have to have a backstop commitment anyway. And so that's kind of why we focused back towards our measures rather than local government. But it's always something we can think about if local governments are interested in doing it.
I think there were also measures in the 89 AQMP and the 82 AQMP.
So I think there's some concepts we're working on now sort of along those lines. We are working with local jurisdictions on mitigation funding if they are approving a project. The County of Riverside we've been working with, and there's others who have expressed interest, as they're approving projects and they want an air quality mitigation or they want help with calculations. We've been working on that. We're working on a more general concept of a CEQA mitigation fund that wouldn't be a one-off every time we're doing a calculation, like actually have it per rule where we could collect money and mitigate wherever that locally or regionally, whichever is trying to be mitigated. There's also opportunities within an ISR on new projects that you can delegate to a local jurisdiction to have an equivalent program, right? In lieu of our rule taking effect.
Right.
And I apologize. Did the fleet rule measure pass or did that die? I can't
So no, that actually didn't get out of committee.
Okay. I was kind of following it and now I'm just brain dead.
We're looking at possibly taking it up again next year, but we're going to talk about it more.
Okay, so that didn't, it's, for the moment, it's, okay, gotcha. And I know there's tons of other air quality legislation that's moving, but this.
Moving quickly. Okay, so any other questions on 30? I think that covers the board agenda. Back to this meeting's agenda. Any other business anyone wants to
I
bring
have
up?
a question, I'm sorry it's late, maybe we can, sat in the Mojave meeting Monday, and Brad was talking about the railroad thing you guys are working on with Barstow, that they still have some tier 0s and tier 1s.
Right.
And they're trying to get some, and they spent like a ton of their Carl Moyer money on little private locomotives. What's going on there?
Matt, you want to, Ian
So
also?
we're meeting with them, September 4th. They're going detailing about it.
Let's move some tier 2s or 3s up to Barstow.
The challenge is the railroads have some concerns.
Right. Railroads don't? So,
We still have some,
to get some older but newer, cleaner
tier
stuff.
4s are here.
Okay. Interesting, okay.
As long as it was true.
We need a railroad,
Oh, yeah,
accept the money.
BNSF up in Barstow and Supervisor Rutherford's position on BNS, if they're around San
We're trying.
Diego, if there's stuff we can do there,
Yeah.
that would be awesome.
Maybe you can help
You know how
talk to
easy the railroad is.
BNSF.
Well, we actually thought we had everything lined up and then the railroads raised the issue.
Their interstate commerce or.
Well, it was the operation in terms of making sure that they stayed within Barstow and didn't come back. So we're trying to figure out how we can get the destruction and still not let them come back.
Interesting.
So we're working on it.
Okay, any public comment on, I don't think there's any members of the public here. Okay, so with that, we'll adjourn. See everyone next month.